I saw some figures in the Wall Street Journal this morning. Kentucky is expected to get back to its previous highest level of employment not until the third quarter of 2014, about 3 years from now. And actually, we will be slightly ahead of the national average, which is expected to get back to its historic high in the fourth quarter of 2014. Some states like Michigan and Ohio and Alabama, Georgia, Florida, California are not expected to get back into 2015, 2016. So we're expected to be slightly ahead in that regard. But education makes a difference even in a tough economy. A couple of things that we're doing. Our chamber did not come to the education priority recently. Even back in the late 80s, when some of the corporate leaders of Kentucky barnstormed the state, speaking to anybody that would listen to them, saying we're 49th and we're not going to take it anymore, we've got to do something to jumpstart education in Kentucky. And the business community agreed to a tax on itself and higher individual taxes in Kentucky. That was the last major tax increase in Kentucky. And there's some differences of
I believe Center College is once again going to get the vice presidential debate. Is that right? Yeah. So give yourselves a hand for that. I think that's great. I'd like to take my time today to talk about Kentucky's education system in terms of transition, both to address what has and has not happened in the past, and also think in terms of transition about what we think needs to happen in the future. First, as we look back on where we as a country and a commonwealth have come from and where we are now, there has been a transition in education. At one time, the U.S. education system was the envy of the world. Today, our higher ed system is still very much respected worldwide, but I think it's a different story when it comes to our K through 12 system. I share concerns from leading educators that the U.S.'s K-12 education system is not progressing the way per child per year. How much would be enough? Would 10,000 be enough? 25,000? 30,000? And one of the teachers union officials looked at him and said, yes, you know, the more the better. But is it really? A recent OECD report shows that per pupil spending in the U.S. leads the world. Yet Mr. Duncan said that our performance ranks 16th among those countries. Spending more has not helped the U.S. retain its former lead. As a note, here in Kentucky, after 20 expensive years of CARA, our ACT college preparation scores have barely moved, and ACT tells us that a pitifully few Kentucky students meet all 4 benchmark scores that signal adequate college preparation for typical universities. Just 16% are fully prepared with adequate reading skills and proper backgrounds in English, math, and science.
Last week here in Kentucky. That's nice. Pat yourselves on the back. Now let's get busy. What we've got is we've got 25% of our kids who are going to drop out of school. And the jobs that you have available for them in 2018, only 8% of the jobs are going to require less than a high school degree. So you think our unemployment numbers are high now with unskilled labor, they're just going to get worse. When folks in the Cincinnati area, you already see it in the paper, we can't find folks skilled and prepared to fill the jobs that we're having now. And it's going to get worse over the next 7 years unless we elevate the level of graduates from our high schools. How we're going to do that? At the state level, we've joined 46 other states to come together around what it means to be college career ready, and we made sure to talk to the higher education people about that. What do you expect from a high school graduate? We're going to have new assessments that are much more rigorous. The numbers will start coming in where Jim's talking about, and that's where I'm going to need your help. Next summer, when we drop from 70–80% proficient to 40% proficient, there's going to be pushback, and it's going to come mainly from Frankfurt because somebody picks up a call and calls Frankfurt. So I'm going to need chamber business people to support us and say, this is a new day, it's a new measure. It's not a measure about basic math and reading skills. Those are important. This is a new measure focused on our kids progressing so that they can go beyond high school into college and career readiness. Now, you got to have an accountability model.
Well, I will say first that I have 2 board members here that I would like to recognize. One is Julie Irwin. She's back there at the back table, and also Jean Crowley, who's our board chair. And I also have a staff member here, Kathy Belcher, who's also an alumni for Boyle County, and she's like worried about that. Like, I'm working for Danville, I graduated from Boyle, you know, it's a little dicey, isn't it? No, we think that makes her extra good, so that's great. When Paula called to ask me to talk about education reform, my first reaction when I hear the word reform is always a negative one, because we've been in alleged reform since 1990 and not a whole lot has changed. I heard someone say once that if Rip Van Winkle had been asleep for 100 years and he woke up today, the only thing he would recognize would be our schools. And that is the truth in many instances. We still have kids in school from 8 to 3. They're still in desks and rows. They're still using the same textbooks that many of you used in schools. So I think the way we need to think about this was explained best by someone I met recently. Our high school has been named a National Innovation Site with 5 other high schools in the United States. We are not there yet, but we are very willing, and not just willing, but we will demand that you talk about it with us. And we're having conversations that make people very uncomfortable. We are very honest about the data, and we know things have to change, or schools will go out of business. You know, sometimes we think that public schools are immune to competition, and we are not. Whether or not those are game changers. We are looking for game changers. We're not looking for technology, for example, to just replace a notebook and an ink pen. We need game changers. One of the game changers that we found is an online program that our kids love for the most part. It's a math program called Alex. Kids move at their own pace. They don't want the teacher to bother them when they're working on it. It is very rigorous, and they are making great progress. Now, some of us have a hard time imagining what it would be like to take a class with just a computer and not a teacher in front of you. And our children today are very different, and we've got to find ways to allow them to move at their own pace as they demonstrate mastery. We have students right now who just completed Algebra 1. If it weren't for this program, most likely they would still sit in Algebra 1 until May. That kind of thinking has to change. We have been holding student focus groups, and our students, when it's funny when you ask them what they would design. If they could design a learning experience that would prepare them for a world ahead, it's a little bit of a trick question, because one, they only know school as they know it, and two, they don't know what's ahead. But what's so interesting, and this is why I think there's so much hope.
Mr. Waters, you talked about money not being the answer, and then you seem to say that magnet schools are the way to go. Can we infer from that magnet schools are cheaper than regular schools?
I didn't say anything about magnet schools. Now, charter schools, we're supportive of that. Public charter schools.
And are they cheaper?
Well, what we found is that in many places charter schools are educating kids, and particularly some of our most at-risk kids, at sometimes half or less the cost of the traditional public schools. And I think some of that comes from the fact that they can be more innovative in their approaches, and they have more flexibility in their programming, and plus they simply have to do that because in most places, public charter schools, they may get a certain portion of the funding that a traditional public school would get for a student, but they don't get all of the additional revenues for capital projects and buildings. They usually have to find ways to finance those on their own or purchase them. So they really do have to live within their means, and that's why we think it can be done, because there are schools doing that. I guess does that answer the question?
I could kind of add to that, if you don't mind, Jim. The digital learning has a lot of potential in Florida.
Yeah.
Florida Virtual School is not funded 100% of the student costs. They're funded at about 70% of student costs. and a certain portion of it is held up until the student actually completes, so there's a performance contract. Last Thursday, we had a statewide convening called the Productivity and Efficiency Conference. Secretary Duncan was one of our keynotes there. But where we need your help in the business community with our schools is to help us figure out how to reduce cost of support processes. You in business, you're excellent at this. You know how to go in and reduce your cost of payroll, reduce your cost of heating, air conditioning, reduce your delivery costs. We're a business in all of those things. And our folks, they're not going to get more money. What they've got to do is figure out how to reduce costs and put the money into the classroom where it needs to be focused. We have one shining example of that in Kentucky. This Kentucky School Board Association worked with energy education. I was in the first school district to have all of its schools, Energy Star schools, just the other night. And they've saved like $500,000 over the last couple of years in a small school system to reinvest into their classroom and to save teaching positions. So local chambers and business can really help your local school systems with productivity and efficiency support to improve processes. This
report we came out with on the digital learning, by the way, showed that the Danville Academy, which is down in Barron County, they're spending only about 38% on students. They're educating their students for about 38% what the traditional public schools are. So there's a lot of promise there for not only avoiding the cost of dropouts to Kentucky, which is a huge cost, as Dr. Holliday was talking about earlier, but also going beyond that and actually, being more efficient and yet providing an effective education for those kids at a lower cost.
I think I'm going to address this to Dr. Holliday. So down into what you're talking about, a lot of times if you do volume buys, you get major discounts. Is there any system in place in the state where maybe the school systems in this state could be buying their fuel collaboratively and dropping that price?
Certainly. Our regional co-ops, that was the primary reason why they were developed. Carmen, which one are y'all in? Okay, so they're in the Central Kentucky Education Co-op, and the largest purchasing thing comes out of Green River and Kentucky Education Development Corp. But those two seem to have larger numbers in the systems. But that's what they do. They do a lot of that, but they could continue to do a lot more. We just worked with Greg last year to really open up a lot more construction purchase services through that type of venue.
I'll address this to Dr. Coleman. I think you mentioned project-based learning. Can you tell us more about that?
Sure. We were fortunate to have long story. We've worked with a school in California, a charter school, high-tech high school. What they do is take a project-based approach. It's about an approach. Traditionally in school, you probably remember sitting in your seat, answering the questions at the end of the chapter, having the chapter test, and then maybe you would do a project as a culminating event, kind of as an afterthought, maybe. That's the traditional method. Project-based learning uses the project as the textbook to be simple, but our students love it. It's real, it's authentic, and they love it. It's a very different way of thinking. They do like it. They have a ball with it. They are our teachers that are really into it, but they're in different places with it. It's very different because you are not front and center anymore. The project-based learning classrooms look like workplaces. They don't look like this kids all sitting in a row. There's a time for that. They do that too, some, just like at work. You have meetings and, but then you also work on the work.